Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive, where we're going to dive into three of the biggest Steelers-related topics of the week before we dive into some listener questions to wrap up the show. I'm Ross McCorkle, and above me here on the screen, as always, for those of you watching on YouTube, is Mr. Joe Clark. Today we're going to be talking about some interesting developments in the wide receiver room, Gabe Davis being brought in. We're going to talk about Shedeur Sanders and one NFL insider's theory as to why the Steelers did not end up drafting him. That will pique your guys' interest, no doubt. And then we will discuss Broderick Jones and some of the positive buzz surrounding him at OTAs so far. Before we dive in, Joe, how are things going on your end?
Doing well, doing well. Excited to dive in today.
The NBA Finals starts in what, 2 days from now? Is that on Thursday?
Yeah, I think it's Thursday because I think the Stanley Cup for the NHL starts tomorrow, so that'll be a fun matchup. Excited to see the Pacers, see if they can pull off the upset against an OKC squad that was kind of the favorites all along.
We had our opportunity to go see the Pacers when we were at the Combine this year. We elected to not do that. The Combine is quite taxing, I'll say. We like to get our sleep because you got to get up early. And so we did miss on the opportunity to possibly see the eventual national champion or NBA champion. So shame on us, but I think we'll both probably be rooting for the Pacers, just the underdog story. Everybody likes that, but to those of you rooting for the Thunder, good on you as well. So we're going to dive into the football side of things here. Gabe Davis, today it was reported by Adam Schefter, ESPN. He posted on Twitter, twofer on his timeline today, two reports in one. The first being that Gabe Davis is going to be coming to Pittsburgh tomorrow he's traveling tomorrow on Wednesday and meeting with the team on Thursday. Probably involves a physical of some sort because he only played 10 games last year and maybe talking contract, obviously. And then the other part of that report was Jonnu Smith, who he reported, I think 5 or 6 days ago, could be a potential trade interest for the Steelers. And that was unlikely to happen, and I think a lot of the local media people had already kind of shot that one down, and Schefter is now following suit, saying that one is unlikely to happen. Joe, we'll start with the Gabe Davis side of things here. What is your initial reaction to seeing that? Do you like the idea of bringing in Gabe Davis? How would he fit? Who would he bump out of the room? Just give me all your reactions.
Yeah, I am. I'm actually like I think I said this a few weeks ago on the pod that I can't believe I was advocating for the Steelers to bring in Gabe Davis just because he's a frustrating player just when you look at consistency. But I actually think he'd be a nice fit in Pittsburgh's receiver room. I think if you have a room that's DK Metcalf, Gabe Davis, Robert Woods, Calvin Austin the third, and Roman Wilson, that really isn't that bad of a room. So maybe he'd bump Scotty Miller off the roster. I don't know how many receivers they're going to keep. I would assume they're going to keep Ben Skoranek for special teams value, but I don't think there's going to anybody he's going to bump off that would really be somebody that's going to make an impact this year. And I just think he's a sulfate. He's a big body. He can block, play in the slot, play outside. And he's been a solid red zone throughout his career, taking away last year in Jacksonville. He's had at least 6 touchdowns every single season of his career. Um, I just think he's going to be cheap because Jacksonville cut him and they're on the hook for I think $11 million of his salary, so you sign him to a minimum. I just think there's very little risk there. I mean, I know he's got the injury concerns. He had the meniscus last year, and so they're going to get him checked out. But even if he does have to miss time during the season, I think he can. Even if he's a pup guy and he's out maybe 6 weeks, he comes back. I think he can be an impact player and somebody that would be good to have in Pittsburgh. So I was actually very excited to see that news this morning, which I like I said, I've never been a big Gabe Davis fan just because I think he's boomer bust. But with where the Steelers are at right now, I think he's somebody that would actually be a pretty beneficial player to come into that room.
Yeah, so in 2024, the Steelers kept 5 receivers on their initial 53. George Pickens, Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin III, Roman Wilson, Scotty Miller. Of course, that evolved a little bit throughout the year, but they had not that many receivers on the roster for most of the season. Ben Skoranek ended up making his way on there before going to IR, came back. He's a valuable special teamer. A year before that, they had 6 wide receivers, so I'd imagine we can expect 5 or 6 as it stands right now, that would be what? Metcalf, Roman Wilson, Calvin Austin III. I guess we count Robert Woods as a lock at this point. Though if Gabe Davis comes in, I think you have to have the conversation potentially about who, if they do only keep 5 like they did last year, who gets the bump? Because like you said, Ben Skoranek is the valuable piece. I don't think they're ready to move on from a Roman Wilson. Obviously, I don't think they're ready. There's absolutely no way they're moving on from Calvin Austin III right now, or obviously DK Metcalf. So does that make Robert Woods expendable at that point, or would they just find a way to squeeze 6 in there? Because I think a lot of people would probably point to Ben Skoranek as the odd man out. And I mean, Scotty Miller's still in the equation. There's some other guys, some of the undrafted guys who I actually like Rock Taylor, and there's other guys out there that I want to see at training camp. And so it's kind of a shame that most of the room is maybe already going to be spoken for. So in my mind, the Gabe Davis thing is just, I don't know. I get why you're excited, and I get why some people are going to be excited just because he does have that big playability. He's 6'2", 225 pounds. He's big frame. But if you look at his stats last year, I know last year is kind of the outlier year, but he had, I think it was 10 contested catch opportunities last year, and he only managed to haul in 2 of them. You're talking about a guy who only had 12 yards per reception last year, kind of fell off a cliff in terms of his big play ability. He only played 10 games or whatever it was. So, I mean, maybe he's due for a bounce back season. I just am a little worried that that's going to come at the expense of, maybe the progress that you'd like to see in a Calvin Austin, or the progress that you'd like to see in a Roman Wilson. So, Joe, if they do end up only keeping 5 like they did last season, who's the odd man out?
From that point, then I think if they sign Davis, then I think you'd have to really consider Robert Woods to be the odd man. Because I mean, like you said, I don't think Roman Wilson's going anywhere. I really don't think Calvin Austin's going anywhere. So at that point, then it would be Robert Woods. It'd be a case of them choosing Gabe Davis over Robert Woods. But I think, with the injury thing, you can kind of look at that as maybe Gabe Davis is one of those guys that could start an IR and bring him back to return at some point during the year, and then kind of make that determination. Because if he's going to sign a minimum salary contract, if they sign him, throw him an IR to start the year, because the meniscus isn't fully healed, and I think he was playing through that for most of the year last year, and then. If Robert Woods all of a sudden, is playing really well, then you can just cut Gabe Davis without any penalty, really, for the most part. But if they feel like they need an upgrade, then I think you can kind of bring in Gabe Davis. So I think it's one of those things where they have a little bit of flexibility if they do bring him, just because, I mean, it's kind of weird to say that they have flexibility because he's banged up, but because he's banged up, I think you kind of have a little bit of flexibility there. If, you want to carry less receivers and want to carry more elsewhere. So yeah, I mean, I do think Robert Woods would kind of be that guy. They're both kind of similar. Both can play outside. Both can play in the slot. Davis is obviously much younger, but the injury concerns are certainly valid right now.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I feel like he didn't he visit somebody else earlier?
Davis.
Yes.
Yeah, he visited the Giants and he visited the Niners. And after the Giants visit, he's keeping contact with the staff because he played with Dable in Buffalo. So that was kind of seemed like that was going to go somewhere, and then nothing happened. And then all of a sudden, this news came out. Kind of out of the blue this morning.
Yeah, it kind of makes you wonder, I guess, what's going on there, why he hasn't signed, if he's going to be cheap. What's the holdup? So that's something definitely to keep in mind as well. But it's good that they're kicking the tires on him, and I think it sounds like, between Schefter's Jonnu Smith reporting and, of course, Jordan Schultz from Fox Sports last week saying that the Steelers are, I forget his exact phrasing, but basically interested in or kind of putting feelers out around the league for playmakers opposite DK Metcalf. And so it seems like even if Gabe Davis isn't the option, that they are still poking around that wide receiver 2 or possibly a weapon tight end market, if you want to follow along in the Jonnu Smith footsteps there. I think it would probably more likely be a receiver just because their tight end room is somewhat full at the moment. But are Are there any other names out there that you can think of that should be on the radar or could be on the radar?
I mean, going back to last offseason, Cortland Sutton, I'm sure there's still, there's a contract thing there, but I don't think Denver's really motivated to move him. I mean, Kyle Pitts, he's banged up right now, and so that's why he's on an OTA. Some people have kind of speculated it's a contract thing as well. It seems to be more injury related than that. And I mean, I guess you have the familiarity there with Arthur Smith, but Pitts has kind of underperformed, at least especially relative to his draft position in the last few years. But if you do follow that tight end thing, and it wouldn't be the worst idea, I guess, to have two receiving threats at tight end. He's a name right now. I mean, kind of dream scenario would be Garrett Wilson, but I don't think he's going anywhere. Just kind of looking at guys who have maybe contract situations bubbling up. But yeah, the market right now, that's kind of the thing. There's just really not that much of a market right now for them to add, a real playmaker. Like, I think Jonnu Smith was probably the best they could do. I mean, it's a guy who had 800 something yards last year. He was a Pro Bowler. And he's obviously had the background with Arthur Smith as well. And even though he wouldn't ascend to those heights working alongside Pat Freiermuth, just given the names that are available, it just kind of I felt Jonnu Smith is really the best they could do. I mean, Alan Lazard, I guess, is the other name that has to be out there, but he's not really exciting anybody except for Aaron Rodgers potentially. So, yeah, not really a ton of, names that are realistic because, like, I don't think Sutton's realistic. I don't think Garrett Wilson's realistic at all. Um, so the feasibility of them acquiring, an actual playmaker, I just don't think there's somebody they're going to be able to get.
Yeah, I just hope that they're able to get that done. In the month, I guess, leading up to training camp. So we're not talking about this right up until week 1. We saw how slow it was to try and integrate Mike Williams into the offense. And yes, that was midway through the season at the trade deadline. But the Steelers definitely value the team building process and getting guys kind of up to speed along with the rest of the team and making sure they all know what's going on. And getting somebody in there last second, probably not the best idea given the Steelers' track record of integrating those types of guys. What did Ian Rappaport have to say? Do you have that pulled up from Pat McAfee? Or actually,
Yes, I do. So basically today, Ian Rappaport said, kind of talking about these reports about the Steelers being interested in adding a playmaker. So the feeling I get from the Steelers is kind of loading up, doing all the resources, all the spots, everything you can. Obviously, there could be a quarterback there at some point, hopefully soon, maybe before the end of the summer. But that's what it feels like, kind of loading up to get to make one more run at it.
Okay, so more or less, I mean, one more run at it. Does that mean that the Steelers are preparing for a blow up? I mean, I don't know. I get exactly how Rappaport, probably just more of his own conjecture or opinion there than anything. But I don't know. I guess there's something to it. The Steelers are probably looking to draft their future hopeful franchise quarterback next year, given all the draft picks they're expected to have. And at that point, is it wise to keep around some of these expensive aging players? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, it depends how good. I mean, sometimes you have your Jaden Daniels of the world who step in and make your team, go all the way to the conference championship right away. Other times it takes a couple years before those rookies can really get up to speed as the quarterbacks. And so I guess there might be something to that. Kind of interesting statement from him there. I don't know if you have any additional thoughts.
Yeah, no, I kind of just the same. I mean, the one last run at it, like, I don't really know how to take that because you could draft, like, as you said, you could draft, a strong rookie quarterback that all of a sudden then you're right back in contention. So I'm not really reading too much into it at this point. But yeah, I mean, the defense is getting older and, there's only so many guys that, I mean, Cam Hayward's only got so many years left in him. Who knows what the deal is going to be with TJ Watt? So, I mean, I guess you can understand where he's coming from with that, specific verbiage, but not really going to read too much into it.
I'll end the conversation with this. You remember Arthur Smith saying that this wide receiver room is completely different than last year whenever they traded Pickens and they were talking about, was it Arthur Smith or was it Omar Khan? Omar Khan, my bad. Excuse me. Omar Khan saying this wide receiver room is completely different than last year, and they appear to be taking the exact same route in terms of trying to upgrade the room last minute. So how different is this room than last year? I guess time will tell, but it doesn't look great as we sit here now. But I think we've both kind of expressed optimism about guys like Calvin Austin III and Roman Wilson, and that's why somebody like Gabe Davis, to me, maybe doesn't really do it for me, because I really want to see what Roman Wilson, what Calvin Austin III can do. But we'll move on to our second topic. This one coming from Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated. And Joe, do you have that pulled up?
I do. So Albert Breer went on the Bill Simmons podcast last week and said about the Steelers, about Shedeur Sanders, and overall quarterback situation. Said, I think people there would tell you that the Russell Wilson thing undermined so many things in the last month of the season. And a lot of that building really wanted them to go back to Justin Fields. It was something where Tomlin was kind of, again, all on his own on that one. And I think that's part of the reason why Tomlin likes Shedeur going into the draft, but I don't think Tomlin would have pressed that button again at quarterback after what happened at the end of the year with Russell. So, I mean, the statement at face value kind of makes sense. I mean, Mike Tomlin admitted he went Lone Ranger and starting Russell Wilson. And, there was reports that people really liked Justin Fields, but the Steelers couldn't have gone back to Justin Fields at the end of the season because he got hurt in Week 15 against the Eagles. So their losing streak didn't. I mean, that was their second loss in a row was Week 15. So that was 15, 16. No, that was the start of their 4-game losing streak, right?
Yeah.
And so that's when he got hurt. So the Steelers couldn't have gone back to Justin Fields. He missed 2 games, I guess, when he got back healthy. But then there's a risk involved there. I have a hard time, and I don't think this is necessarily Breer's hard reporting. I just have a hard time buying that if Mike Tomlin really liked Shedeur Sanders, he was going to stay quiet because of what happened with Russell Wilson. And, he put himself on the line to start Russell Wilson, and things went sideways late in the year. But if he really liked Shedeur Sanders and thought he was going to be a good quarterback, you'd think, he would say, hey, I really like this guy and think he's going to be a good quarterback, and then the rest of the room can decide from there. So I don't necessarily buy that Tomlin was in the draft room staying silent about how much he likes Shedeur Sanders because he was thinking, oh, well, backfire with Russell Wilson, so it's going to backfire again. I mean, if you're Mike Tomlin, you've been the head coach for so long, you have enough goodwill built up, you can stick your neck out again. So, I mean, yeah, I don't really buy all of what Breer was trying to sell with that. What are your thoughts?
It would make sense if they had passed on him only once in the first round, but at that point, I mean, if you're reaching the third, the fourth, I mean, people talk about Jack Sawyer as kind of a luxury pick there. I mean, I think there's an argument to be made that it was maybe more of a necessity than most people would think. But certainly quarterback's a way bigger need, and if you have any kind of high grade on a Shedeur Sanders, then you take him in the fourth, right? And so, even if Tomlin was maybe like on the fence in the first round and maybe was doing what Breer suggested he was doing, it doesn't make any sense once you get into the later rounds at all to me. And I think Tomlin, by all accounts, is kind of driving this Aaron Rodgers situation too. And so it's not like he's not sticking his neck out. Like he's not gun shy like from Russell Wilson. He's out there doing basically the same thing with Aaron Rodgers. Now, this is not, I guess, a hard fact. This is kind of what's been reported out there, that Tomlin's the one driving the Rodgers train. So I don't know. I think it's kind of a little silly, but it did generate buzz this week, so we did want to talk about it. Returning to Fields, yeah, I mean, he was, like you said, he was hurt. I do think there's a conversation to be had about what is the Steelers' vision at quarterback. I think Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's Brian Batko was critical of it this week, saying that they basically don't have a vision. And I think to a certain degree, he's correct in that, because Mike Tomlin, leading up to drafting Kenny Pickett, and even before that, while Ben Roethlisberger was still in the league, was talking about the evolving nature of the game and quarterback mobility. You heard it 10, 20, a bunch of times from Mike Tomlin talking about quarterback mobility. In fact, he said it about a month before the Steelers ended up making Kenny Pickett their first-round pick. And Pickett was, I guess, mobile enough, but he wasn't a dual threat, and like a true kind of dual threat running quarterback. And so from there, okay, you could kind of say, all right, they did kind of draft quarterback mobility. Well, all of that ended up failing. And of course, the Steelers bring in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. They have the quarterback mobility right there in the room, and yet they go to Russell Wilson, more in favor of that veteran leadership than the quarterback mobility that Mike Tomlin claimed was so important. And now they're taking one more step and trying to get Aaron Rodgers, who's 41 years old and more of a statue than he used to have quarterback mobility to a degree, but now he's not. And so what is the Steelers' vision? And when they are drafting a quarterback, presumably next year, what are they going to be after? I actually have no idea at this point, because probably a year or two ago, I would have told you, yeah, they're going to be looking for a Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, like legitimate threat with their legs type of guy. And now I honestly have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, Tomlin said the same thing this offseason, too. And that was kind of why when, there's some initial reports on Aaron Rodgers, it's like, well, Tomlin harped on quarterback mobility. Why are they going to go out and get this guy? They don't have if they have a vision, it's incredibly unclear on what specifically they're looking for, because it seems like the last few off seasons is just like, well, Mike Tomlin likes this guy because he was once a really good quarterback and he was once a really good leader, so let's bring him in. Like that's what it seems like their vision is right now. So yeah, I have no idea what they're going to be looking for next off season. Like, and if Brandon Whedon was available, that would be who I think they'd be looking for, because hey, he's an older guy, he can bring some leadership. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have no clue.
Yeah. Well, I think that sums up the second topic here. We'll move on to Broderick Jones and just some other OTA topics. But Broderick Jones has been generating some positive buzz. Some of that has to do with him saying he lost some weight. What was it, 15 pounds or 20, something in that
Yeah,
ballpark?
he was down between 20 and like 15 to 20 pounds, because he said he played at like 325 last year, and now he's between like 305 and 310.
Which to me is honestly a little lighter than I like my tackles, but his rationale was interesting. He basically said, I want to be able to not have to worry during the season about so much about gaining weight if that ends up happening. And so he's kind of losing that weight, and I guess in the meantime it's made him more agile. Now, I don't really think his agility was ever part of the issue, to be completely honest with you. His athleticism was never really a question. I guess it just further accentuates what he was already good at, which I guess is a good thing. But he still has a lot of work to do in terms of the technique, in terms of just above the neck, between the ears, and just processing the game, and hopefully the game slowing down for him. So that's what's more important. But it seems like some teammates have had some positive things to say about him. If you have some of that pulled up.
Yeah, so Zach Frazier said that he seems to be more comfortable at left tackle. He said hopefully that feels more like home from him, and just basically said he looks better. Mason Rudolph said that he seems more comfortable on the left and that he's done a great job back there. And also added that he's starting to get more vocal and take on more of a leadership role, which is always good. He himself said that he thinks a move to left tackle provide a bigger boost to his game. Nick Herbig said Broderick Jones is definitely a natural left tackle. Um, so, the guy going against him that can kind of tell. And then, not on the team, but Greg Rosenthal of NFL Media, and he was on the Mina Kimes show, and he called Broderick Jones Pittsburgh's X Factor. He said, on paper, the offensive line could be really good if he plays well, and that's the part that fans have to be excited about. But basically said that they have no backup plan if he doesn't play well, if the move to left tackle doesn't work. And he's right about that. I mean, the Steelers' backup offensive tackles right now are Calvin Anderson, Gareth Warren, and Dylan Cook. And Calvin Anderson didn't look great in limited reps last season, and Ward and Cook are. I mean, Cook, I guess, is entering year 3. Maybe we'll get something out of him this year that will, provide you some confidence. But Gareth Warren's an undrafted free agent rookie camp invite, so how much can you really rely on him? So really, the Steelers need Broderick Jones to have a strong season this year. So it's at least good to hear early on that his teammates are at least seeing some sort of difference from him playing on the left side.
Yeah, Broderick Jones, to me, I mean, you think back to after his rookie season, Mike Tomlin said, I forget the exact quote, but basically compared him in some ways to a Marquise Pouncey type figure, saying that he's a rising leader of that offensive line. And it's hard to be a rising leader when you're the biggest issue in terms of the actual play on the offensive line. And so hopefully he can get his play up to par so that those leadership skills can be put to better work. And I think we saw some of it last year, like when George Pickens did, I forget, some dumb penalty he commit, and Broderick Jones grabbed him by the helmet and, was basically trying to get him to lock in. So you like to see that stuff, and, you want him to be that leader of the offensive line. He's going to be the oldest, maybe not the oldest age-wise, but he's going to be the most veteran member of that offensive line before too long here. So once Isaac Seumalo presumably either retires or moves on in free agency, I think, next year. So, yeah, I think like Zach Frazier is probably going to be one of the obvious leaders of that offensive line. But when you look at a guy like Frazier, he's not really your charismatic, natural leader type, to be honest. Like, just looking at him in interviews, like he's more of a just quiet, straightforward, almost like a Sayamalu-esque kind of guy. You don't get a ton from him. And maybe he opens up on the field a little more. Obviously, he has to communicate as the center, so he's doing a good job at that. I don't think he got enough credit for the job he did last year, especially given the injury his senior season. And then also last year, he did a phenomenal job. But Broderick Jones is a natural kind of guy that people gravitate to. He seems like a funny guy. He seems like a guy who would have a lot of friends on the team. And so that's the kind of guy you want as the leader in the room. And so I just hope that his play can kind of catch up to that so that can actually be realized. Joe, who's the bigger question mark? I think a lot of people are assuming Broderick Jones is the bigger question mark, and maybe he is. But a lot of people are also assuming that Fautanu is already kind of a done deal. He's going to be good. He's already successful, and that's impossible because he's only played one game. So who is the actual bigger question mark?
Yeah, I mean, we heard a lot of positive reports on how Fontano played last year, but I thought he was a little in the one preseason game against the Texans was a little bit iffy. He was solid. He was good against the Broncos in the regular season, but I still think he's probably the bigger question mark right now, just because we haven't seen him play. I mean, we've seen some flashes out of Jones. We've seen where it's like, okay, this guy looks pretty good. We've also seen the bad, but I do think we see the potential. You can see where it is. Fontano just hasn't played enough for us to I think really kind of have that baseline for what he can be. I mean, you see it in college, obviously, but in the NFL against NFL competition. So for me, right now, he like for 2025, he's the biggest question. He's the bigger question mark for me than Broderick Jones is.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I maybe would lean more towards Broderick just because he's kind of at a more critical juncture of his career. If he doesn't do well, then the Steelers can't pick up his fifth-year option confidently, and then at that point, well, you have to be worried about maybe losing him or then having to go down the franchise tag route if he suddenly plays well in his contract year. So I think it's a bigger year for Broderick, but I think it's fair that, Fautanu is far from a sure thing. Though, the one regular season game he played, there was a lot of positives, and the reporting on him all throughout the preseason was very positive. He looked good. So, I think that's fair. I don't know if we have any more on that specific topic, but I did want to squeeze in Darnell Washington. Seems like another Georgia Bulldog, another former Georgia Bulldog shedding weight. I don't know what the theme is with that this offseason, but Darnell Washington seemingly also losing what he said today. Also lost 10 to 15 pounds. And his weight previously it started with a 3. It was 300 and something. And so you can assume he's now 290 something, if maybe 280, high 280 something, depending on what his weight actually was. And by all accounts, he seems to look much quicker. Mason Rudolph said he's a completely different player or a different player. Mason Rudolph would know better than anybody. He didn't play with Washington last year. And so his only frame of reference is Darnell Washington 2 years ago to Darnell Washington now. And so he's seeing that big jump, that exaggerated big jump of basically a full other year of experience. And so to Rudolph, he probably does look like a much different player. But Mark Kaboly reporting that he was, I forget the exact adjectives he used, nimble was one of them, fluid was one of them, and maybe fast or something along those lines were the 3 adjectives he used to describe Darnell Washington, and said that he stood out at OTAs. And Mark Kaboly kind of admitted that he never says anyone stands out at OTAs because he doesn't believe in OTAs really meaning much. And so when he's saying that Darnell looks good and asserted himself as a receiver, that is a very interesting thing to me, and I think could be very consequential for the Steelers offense this season. Joe, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I mean, I fully agree with what you're saying there. I think that Darnell is definitely a player that the Steelers can kind of turn to this year. I mean, if you look at John, they're trying to go after Jonnu Smith. They kind of want to see improvement in the tight end room. I think Darnell is a player that can kind of take that jump for them.
Yeah, I think the Steelers training staff is a different story. They've had a bad track record recently, but the Steelers medical staff, I will say, has kind of aced this whole thing lately. I'm trying. There's probably an example I'm forgetting, maybe, but you talk about Darnell Washington apparently fell in the draft because of a knee issue that teams had medically flagged. He was being talked about as a first-round draft pick. The Steelers were able to get him in the third, and some people said he'd be a one-contract player or would never make it to the end of his rookie contract because of that knee. And not only is he seemed to be fine and progressing as a receiving threat, he's played all 17 games both years, plus both playoff games. So he's played, 36 games without any breaks or without any significant injury of note. And so he is one that they've aced. Peyton Wilson, knock on wood, I guess, but last year, very healthy for the most part. No issues with the knee, which apparently was missing an ACL. If the Steelers medical staff is checking these guys out and saying that they're okay, well, so far it seemed to kind of be the case. Are there any big examples that are going to make me look dumb, Joe?
No, I mean, not off the top of my head. I was going to say, like, last year, Peyton Wilson playing every game was kind of huge. The only injury he had was a concussion in the preseason. So, yeah, and there's nothing really I can think of. I mean, Holcomb was, I guess, maybe a longer recovery than you'd think, but that seemed to be like a pretty serious knee injury. And they also didn't need to rush him back last year with what they had in the linebacker room. So there's really nothing off the top of my head I can think of that would be a bad case for the medical staff.
Yeah, just talking about the guys who the medical staff would have had to clear before they came in. So draft picks, free agents.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess Troy Fautanu is maybe an example. There was that maybe knee thing that obviously he had a knee injury, had two knee injuries if you count the preseason. And so I guess it remains to be seen what's going on there. So I guess we'll see with Fautanu. And there's one other. Of course, Derek Harmon. Does that bode well for Derek Harmon and his, I guess, shoulder stuff? So hopefully it does, because apparently there were some teams maybe slightly concerned. But if the Steelers signed off on him, well, the track record recently has been good. We're going to move into our questions, and if you have a question that you want answered, that's 412-254-3145. Again, that's 412-254-3145. If you missed it, that's in the show notes. You can actually text that or give us a call and leave a voicemail. If you're a little shy, the text line's fine. Just let us know your name, where you're from, and we're going to start with a text question here. This one being from Rich in Dayton, Ohio. Rich, really enjoy the show and insights you both bring. Thank you, Rich. I'm interested in your assessment as Mike Tomlin as head coach. There is no question that he is a great, quote, leader of men. And there's no question that leadership is a very important component of being a good head coach, but it's not the only component. Other aspects include roster construction, player development, game planning, game management, and there are probably more. I'd be interested in your assessment of Mike Tomlin in each of these areas. I assess him to be below average in each of these areas, so it's not surprising that a great leader who is below average in the other aspects of coaching is largely a 500 coach. Your thoughts? Well, I think if we just go category by category, let's see what categories did he lay out here. He said roster construction. Well, how big of a voice did Tomlin have in those Kevin Colbert years is the big question there. I don't know. I think Kevin Colbert had been there obviously longer than Tomlin had, and so I think he had a good amount of power. And it seems like things have taken a turn for the better since Khan has been around. And some people would say that Tomlin has a bigger voice in the room now that he's kind of the tenured guy. And so if you take that to its natural conclusion, then you think, okay, well, now that Tomlin has more power, they seem to be drafting better. And that's just me kind of, I guess, painting both sides of the argument there. Joe, where do you fall on that?
Yeah, I don't really know how fair it is to really give him a grade per se on roster construction because, like you said, we don't know how much of it. Say, yeah, during the Colbert years and Colbert's, later draft classes are a big reason why the Steelers are kind of in a spot where they're not a legitimate Super Bowl contender. They had a lot of misses there. So I don't really think it's fair to necessarily judge him on roster construction. I mean, if you had to, I guess I'd probably say somewhere like average just because you don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think it's fair to give him a grade there.
Player development, I think some of the assistant coach hirings have been questionable. Obviously, you point to Matt Canada, and the clock's starting to tick on a guy like Pat Meyer at offensive line. He's got all this talent. It's time for that to start being molded into a great group, not just an average group, but a great group. And so I think he's kind of at a critical inflection point on that, on player development. I will give it to you, though, Rich. It's been a little on the rougher side lately in terms of, I mean, you just look at the number of draft picks that they have signed to second contracts. It is abysmally low. Again, that kind of feeds into the roster construction side of things, and Kevin Colbert failing in his last several draft classes. And so it's hard to develop players when you're not even drafting the right talent to begin with, or I guess it's a chicken and an egg situation there. But game planning and game management, any thoughts there, Joe?
I think his game management is definitely a little bit underwhelming at times. I mean, it's been a long-running joke. Mike Tomlin can't win a challenge. His challenge and timeout usage has always been questionable, especially at the end of the half. I don't think he gives them enough chances sometimes. As far as game planning, during the regular season, you at times, I feel like the game planning has been, pretty solid. In the playoffs, it looks like they're an absolute mess that didn't watch their opponent once. So, in the totality of it, when the game planning, when it actually matters, I would also go below average. So I generally agree that the player development, game planning, and game management side with you, Rich, that I would say probably below average.
Yeah, I think the game planning is maybe a hair better than most people would give credit for. I point to, I don't know, I guess like the Falcons game last year when they were trying to make sure that Justin Fields was capable of getting them wins. And, well, lo and behold, they got to 4-2 with Justin Fields by following their game plan, following the script, controlling the football. And things started to fall apart down the stretch when George Pickens got hurt. That was one of the big things. And there were some other factors, of course, as well. And the defense started to fall apart as well. And so you ding him, like you said, for the playoffs and down the stretch. It was kind of all over the place, but I do think people call Tomlin just a player's coach or just a leader of men and knock him for not being an X's and O's guy. But if you talk to guys who are actually in that building, or if you watched Hard Knocks last year, I mean, Tomlin is like a big football junkie, and all he does is watch film and go over X's and O's with various people in that building. And so, you can look at the outcomes and just say that he's not been above the line, and I guess that's fair, but I think it's a little foolish to say he's not an X's and O's guy at all. I mean, that's a little outlandish to me, but point taken, Rich. I think, this is going to be an important year for Mike Tomlin, and unfortunately, they're going to have to do it with whatever this quarterback uncertainty is that's happening right now. We're going to do one more question. We usually only do one, but I think this is maybe a first-time caller, and so I wanted to make sure. Yeah.
Before we hit the question, we got a little late breaking news from Adam Schefter. The Steelers have renewed conversations with Jonnu Smith, and the trade between the Steelers and Dolphins is still alive.
Oh, man. The local media in Pittsburgh are cooked for this one. They've been saying that is fake news for the last week. And, I mean, it never seemed like fake news to me just because, Adam Schefter is not the kind of guy throwing around just agent favors. I mean, I get it to a certain degree, and their point makes sense, but it's Adam Schefter. I mean, he doesn't even usually tweet that like things are in progress. He's usually the kind to tweet that it's a done deal. And so I don't know, but that is interesting.
And the fit makes sense with, he's played so much under Arthur Smith. So it would make sense if there was interest from the Steelers. I wouldn't be surprised if Drew Rosenhaus was feeding Schefter some stuff, but the fact that he's tweeting about this trade being in progress and he's done it now twice, leads you to think that there's at least some fire there.
Yeah, and the whole time, the backdrop of Jordan Schultz saying that they are, in fact, poking around for other playmakers, and it just, I don't know, it was totally believable to me, and from the start. And so, great. I'm glad that this is happening, and if you stack his best season up to the Steelers roster, tight ends all time, it would be the second best tight end season in league history, what he had last year, 870-something or 800, upper 800s yards, which would only be second to Eric Green, better than any Heath Miller season. Now, I'm not calling him a better tight end than Heath Miller. Relax. I don't think that, but just looking at the stats, he was a prolific receiver last season. And in terms of touchdowns, I think he had 8 last year, which would have tied Heath Miller's best season and the single best tight end season in Pittsburgh history for a tight end. So it makes sense. And I think there are some interesting things they could do. What does that do for a guy like Connor Hayward? Well, he's probably gone. at that point, unless Donald Parham is the odd man out and they really like Connor Hayward's special teams abilities. But I don't know. I just can't see him staying involved. Now, the Steelers were using 3 and 4 tight end packages last year, and I don't really know exactly how they would deploy that this year at this point in time. But if they got Jonnu Smith, that would certainly be different. I'm going to have to look into Aaron Rodgers and his tight end usage over the years and if that's trended in a positive or negative direction, because I honestly haven't looked at that too much yet. But I did want to make sure to get this question in from Larry real quick, and I don't want to gloss through it too fast, but this is Larry from Cary, North Carolina.
Hey, Ross and Joe, love the show. This is Larry from Cary, North Carolina. And my question is around Connor Hayward. I just feel like this is the offseason where he needs to get bumped off the roster, whether it be the undrafted fullback that got the biggest bonus in franchise history, or whether it be trade. I know there's rumors about Jonnu Smith out there from the Dolphins. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I just don't see the value that he's creating, and we've brought some people on the roster with some great special teams ability, so it just seems like he's taking up a valuable spot. Thank you for the answer, and thanks to you for all that you do to inform Steeler Nation.
Well, we certainly appreciate that, Larry, and I think that was your first question. If not, I apologize for my memory, but yeah, thank you for the question, no doubt, and a very timely question because you mentioned Jonnu Smith, you mentioned Connor Hayward. I think we just touched on some of that, and I think it all boils down to the special teams ability, and when you're constructing the roster, you need good special teamers. The Steelers and Danny Smith value special teams immensely. And Connor Hayward played quite a bit of special team snaps last year. I have that pulled up here. 87 on kick return, 93 on kick coverage, 63 on punt return, 75 on punt coverage. So he's a 4-phase special teamer, which are rare. I mean, that's like a core special teamer type of player. 318 total snaps on special teams. He made 8 tackles. In that special team stuff as well. Commit 0 penalties, which is kind of an underrated thing when you look at the Steelers' history of special teams penalties in recent years. So all that to say, it's tough to edge a guy like Connor Hayward out because you do need to make sure that you're replacing those special teams snaps elsewhere. And currently, I haven't kind of put together my initial 53-man roster prediction to really have this fully fleshed out in my head, but if you're getting, I mean, you'd be replacing him with Jonnu Smith and or Donald Parham, and I don't really see either of those guys as special teamers. And so who's picking up the slack? Is it going to be some additional DB? Is it going to be one of those wide receivers? Well, we just had that wide receiver conversation earlier in the show where if you're edging out, you know, if that room's full and Ben Skoranek then becomes very valuable. You need him to stay around. And so, yeah, you just have to start to think about the whole picture of the roster and special teams, and that's the difficult part. Joe, did I miss anything there?
Yeah, no, that sounds good. I mean, that sounds exactly what I was thinking. Well, I guess we'll get a better idea in training camp who could potentially take on that special teams battalion if Hayward is going to get cut. But given the importance of special teams in Pittsburgh, I don't think it's as clear cut as a lot of people think it may be.
I agree. All right. Well, first time question from Larry. First time question, I believe, from Rich. We appreciate both of those. We hope you guys will call back or text back. Absolutely. That is all for today's show. I am Ross. That is Joe. And we will be coming to you next week after the first day of mandatory minicamp. Who's going to show up? Who's not going to show up? We'll cover all of that and more. We'll catch you guys next time.